Check it out.
All right, good morning. Welcome in. The Out of Bounds Show is brought to you by RPT, Rick's Pro Truck. 3 locations in Mississippi, the number 1 Jeep truck accessory stores. RPT Commercial, Rick's Pro Truck in Flowood, and Rick's Pro Truck in Gluckstadt. Rick'sProTruck.com, spray and bed liners, lift kits, tires, and wheels for your Jeep or your truck, all at RPT and Rick's Pro Truck. We welcome in our friend Tom Luginbill, national college football analyst with ESPN. Lugs joins us on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. And although I can't get into this because my audience doesn't really get into Big Ten football, Luke saw Jeff Brom pull another upset over Michigan State on Saturday. But we got to start with Dan Mullen and the Florida Gators, Tom. And so we made this run 9 years with Dan. We got to see, up close what he inherited. He inherited a program that was basically run like it was 1978. And this is what I say on the air, Lugs. I say that Dan Mullen modernized the Mississippi State football program. And, hey, Dak, Jeffrey Simmons, Chris Jones, Preston Smith, Fletcher Cox, Danico Autry, Pernell McPhee. He sent a ton of players to the NFL. And if you can win here, I've always thought you could damn near coach win anywhere. And yet, and I never thought, Tom, that his team would check out and lose their toughness because of what he had to do here and the way he ran the program. How surprised were you at what happened in Columbia, South Carolina on Saturday night?
Absolutely stunned, but it's very clear now with that outcome that he's lost that football team. And maybe more disturbing, that football team that shows so little care and pride for not only themselves, but their university. They just seem to go through the motions, and he hasn't been able to get them back. Now, listen, I think we would all agree that, Todd Grantham is a very polarizing topic, all right? And he can do some things at times that are just flat out unsound. And so it puts your football team in jeopardy. But this is beyond that now. This isn't about those types of things. This is about performance and effort with a team that just went on the road to take on a football team that not only doesn't have their starting quarterback, doesn't have their former GA who became their quarterback. They're now down to number 3 and get throttled. It's almost inexplainable.
I don't think he's getting fired. I think Scott Strickland's smart enough to know what Dan can do and so on. And you don't ever – I know fans think, oh, yeah, let's just start over. But flipping a building is like 30, 40 people, and it's it's just a mess. He ran his good friend John Hevesy, who's been with him for 20 years on the offensive line. There's more coming today. We're told Greg Knox will be let go and some others. But I don't know, Tom. Can he hand it off and maybe hire an offensive coordinator and step away from play calling, play that Dabo, Saban, even Ed Ogeron did it for 1 year, CEO role? How do you see that going?
No, I don't think that's in his DNA. He's got too much Jimbo Fisher in him in that regard. It's going to be his offense. He's going to call it, and that's just how it's going to be. Listen, there are going to have to be staff changes, and ultimately after you've made the staff changes, if it continues, all right, then the only other remaining change is you.
Right.
We just actually saw that with Ed Ogeron, right? He goes out, he makes multiple staff changes, not just with position coaches, but brings in 2 entirely new coordinators, all right? Things don't improve, so now who's left? He is. And you're right, there's a relationship there with Scott Strickland. I think, obviously, Dan Mullen didn't all of a sudden become a bad coach,
no.
All right? But something's not right. There's a disconnect. and it's not working. There's a chemistry problem. I think there's again, a team care and effort problem. There doesn't seem to be any pride in the program. And, I mean, we're talking about the University of Florida here. And to me, that's alarming. And so can it happen to anybody? Could you have a season where you have a dip? Yes. I think Scott Strickland probably looks at it from that perspective. But, really at the end of the day, the thing that stands out the most to me about this, Bo, is this is the first time in a long time he has had incompetency at quarterback. And it's made him immortal. Like that's the thing. It's like you become mortal really quick when you don't have a quarterback. And, ask Manny Diaz right now how important the quarterback is.
Right.
If you hit on one, it can cure a lot of woes. It can mask a lot of deficiencies. When you're struggling with not just one, but with two, it can impact the rest of your football team, and it has with Florida.
This is going to be wild to see. They should win out. Well, I say that after the way they played last weekend. I don't know what they'll do. Samford at Missouri, Florida State. Maybe they should. Maybe FSU will. At this point, I guess they could lose 2 or 3, or they could win 2 or 3. Yeah. Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds show. All right, we usually don't do this, but I want to go ahead and get into A&M and Ole Miss because it's such a big game, and there's no point in breaking down Ole Miss Liberty. It was a snoozer. Okay, A&M's playing good football. That was a super physical game against Auburn. It was 3-3 for what felt like 3 hours, but A&M did what they needed to do, and good grief, they're physical in the line of scrimmage, and Elko's got things rolling. Then you got Ole Miss on the other side with the best quarterback in America who looks like he's a little injured, and they've got some other guys that are hurt. So handicap this one for me, Tom. What are you looking at A&M at Ole Miss this weekend?
Well, I think you're 100% correct that Matt Corral probably isn't at full health, and that doesn't bode well when you're playing a team with the defensive front personnel that Texas A&M has. You got to be able to protect Matt Corral and give him opportunities and maybe limit some of the run stuff, and try to keep him clean. If he has to improvise and create, which we know he's capable of doing, all right, those are separate standalone plays. But if he's not at full health, you're talking about a very, very physical. A&M now just completely shut down an Auburn run game that ran wild the week before. And so this is going to be interesting to see if Ole Miss can create some bounce in their run game versus Texas A&M. And I'll say this: I'm really impressed, not with so much the development, because I don't know how much better he's gotten, but A&M on offense able to work around average to below average quarterback play. We forget to acknowledge that Zach Calzada was the backup. He hadn't played a lick until he came into the lineup. He's had some moments where he's looked pretty decent, but for the most part, they're having to work around him, and they're doing just enough to pull it off. The problem is if Ole Miss were to get hot, all of a sudden they're able to create some big explosive plays. Can A&M answer that? Are they talented enough, if they had to get into a track meet at quarterback, to match wits with Matt Corral?
That's a good point. Or will A&M gash Ole Miss on the ground and keep
and limit possessions?
Right, with Corral.
Yep.
2.5 point spread.
That's what happened. To be honest with you, that's what happened in my game with Purdue and Michigan State. That's how Kenneth Walker got bottled up in the second half. He had 4 carries for 9 yards in the third quarter. They never had the ball.
Wow. Well, great job by Brom and Purdue. Wow.
Yeah, now they just got to go out and beat the people they're supposed to. If they do that, they'll win the West.
Yeah.
They're not a bad football team. I've seen them twice now. The quarterback turns the ball over, they're very average. When he doesn't, that wasn't a fluke the other day. They were clearly the better team than Michigan State.
And I wonder if Brom will get a call. Well, we'll see. Okay, so we know that Georgia is the deal in the league, and But this is so week to week as far as the performance we get out of these 20 and 21-year-olds. But Bama,
Yeah.
Bama wasn't interested. I don't know how much to chalk this up is Bama's maybe not making the strides that we think they should make, or Bama just checked out and did not. I mean, we saw it in the NFL yesterday, Tom. I mean, the Bills, who are a really good football team, checked out. The Cowboys, who are a really good football team, checked out, and there was another team who was, so it even happens at the pro level, which blows my mind. What was your takeaway from Bama and LSU being a close game?
That right now, Alabama, in my opinion, they lack confidence and continuity in the offensive line, and it's permeating throughout their team. It's the first time in the Nick Saban era we are seeing an Alabama offensive line not only struggle to consistently perform, they can't figure out right now what the best set of five is. They're trying to figure out who to put at right tackle, who to put at center. They put Chris Owens at center, which is where he should be. He was previously playing offensive tackle. He has no business being out there. As a result, they can't effectively run the football. All right, so a lot of pressure is. Thank goodness Bryce Young is an athlete, because if they had a statue playing quarterback, Alabama would be in big trouble because they haven't been able to offset a lack of a run. They wouldn't be able to offset the lack of a run game with a dynamic quarterback that can extend plays and create second chances. So I just don't think they're a very confident team on offense, and they've made a lot of what I would label sloppy plays on defense that have to do with technique and alignment, things that we become accustomed to seeing Alabama be so proficient at. But, missed run fits, poor tackling, lunging, not being in the right position in a zone coverage alignment. Those types of little things have led to people getting big plays on.
Yeah, I mean, Pete Golding's just not Kirby Smart or Jeremy Pruitt. And it's amazing that Saban has stayed with him. I know he knows the game, and I'm sure he'd be a good linebackers coach. But, man, when you're running that whole deal, good luck. Okay, so I want to do this for a second before I continue to bounce around. Tom Luginbill on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line, national college football analyst with ESPN. Because of what you just described in Alabama's O-line, I think the natural thought process is, well, Georgia, because of that front seven, will absolutely dominate manhandle. Okay, and because of the way Bama's looked since the beginning of the season and the way Georgia has. But it's a one-off game for 3.5 hours. And if Bama doesn't slip up down at Auburn, Tom,
yeah,
on just one afternoon, 3.5 hours, do you give Bama a shot, or you just say, no, the Georgia defense will be too much and they'll dominate that in Atlanta?
Well, no, I think you have to give Bama a shot. Now, they may not be the better team this time around, but they're the team that's been there. They're the team that's done that. And now, all of a sudden, the tables have turned. All of the pressure, all of the weight of that weekend will be on Georgia's shoulders. You watch all the pundits going into the week, whether it's game day, whatever. If that game happens and Alabama continues to win, but maybe not win in the fashion we've seen them win, everybody will be talking Georgia. This is the year for Georgia. This is the year that Kirby finally gets Nick. Well, that would worry me if I was Kirby Smart. That would concern me because Kirby's been there before, but this team hasn't necessarily been there before. And
right.
Alabama has. And I don't think Alabama would take too kindly to that national narrative.
All right. As far as what you're seeing play out right now, Georgia is dominant on defense. How would you describe them on offense?
Sufficient. Good enough. A little bit like, how could I describe? I feel like they're a little bit like some of those early Nick Saban teams that were good, talented, maybe not electrifying or explosive, but did what they had to do to make sure that they sustain drives and score. But it may not be flashy. It may not be pretty. I got to be honest with you. I mean, and I give Stetson Bennett a lot of credit, man. because he was abysmal a year ago when they had to play with him.
Yeah.
And now he actually looks like a bona fide scholarship quarterback, and good for him, and good for Georgia. The question is, are we ever going to know? And maybe it's Alabama, but are we ever going to know what would happen if they actually had to go tit for tat with somebody, and it started turning into a volley, and you're trying to figure out, all right, they score, we score, they score, we score, they score, we score, field goal. All right, now all of a sudden another one gets scored. Now it's a 10-point difference. What would Georgia do if that had to happen? Are they capable of it? Absolutely.
Right.
Are we going to know that? I think it's too early to tell. They haven't played anybody on offense that can threaten them.
And that's a great point. I mean, what you want to do is you want Kirby to have to coach, because I don't think he's special at all at coaching. I do it as a defensive coordinator, but he's a great recruiter, and he has set up, and he's out-recruited Bama, and you already know this. He's oversigned more than anybody in the league. Saban used to oversign more than anybody in the league. I don't know why that shifted, but when we've looked at the numbers, Georgia is the number one signer, if you will, in the SEC. Signer in the Southeastern Conference, with A&M coming in second and Bama coming in third. As ESPN's national, recruiting analyst, Tom, I don't know what happened there the last few years.
Well, they may have been working their numbers too, though, where they've got gray shirt kids, they've got blue shirt kids, they have guys that aren't going to – the number looks big, but it's actually not the number that will – because they'll be able to count kids back to a previous class or forward to the next. And so the numbers aren't as always black and white as they seem. Like when people say, oh, well, you can only sign 25. Well, how'd they sign 29? Well, there's reasons for that. And they have to get to a certain point where they've got to get down to a certain number. But I think they happen to be in a state where there are a lot of football players that would consider a gray shirt as opposed to taking a full scholarship somewhere there just because of the identity and how they grew up around that program. They've always wanted to be a Georgia Bulldog. So it kind of opens the door for you to maybe have some more opportunities with kids. Whereas if you're at another place, let's just say you're at South Carolina, you're not going to have that luxury. You're not going to be able to keep a pool of players over here that you say, okay, we can immediately go dip to that kid because that guy's going to hang with us until the very last moment before he takes another opportunity. Georgia can do that. I think to some extent, Alabama can do it when they want to. Texas has been able to do it, but Texas does it with guys that are tapped out. So, it's like they don't have anything left in the tank.
Which is wild there. But, all right, Dabo, what do you think Dabo's thinking right now? I'll flip this. We'll be back in the conversation. I have the path of least resistance because the ACC is so bad. Or do you think he sees the way that Kirby is marching, and he's young, and he could be at Georgia another decade, and he's like, we'll never have those kind of dudes, and I will only bottle Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, and back-to-back is unheard of, but maybe only once in the next 10, maybe 15 years? What do you think Dabo's thinking as he's watching what's playing out this year in college football?
I think he probably looked at what Georgia has been doing the last couple of years, very similar to how he looked at his first 3 to 4 years at Clemson and what they were building and how they were building it. I would disagree to some extent that they're not going to have those caliber of players. They have had those caliber of players. I think they have continued access to those caliber of players. Remember, it was just a couple of years ago, we're talking about, those 4 defensive linemen that they had that all played for 3 or 4 years together. It was arguably one of the best defensive line combinations in the history of college football. So they've done that. But I'll say this, nobody has a Jordan Davis. Not Alabama, not Ohio State, not Clemson, not anybody. That guy is in a category by himself. But I listen, for the first time in Dabo Swinney's tenure, and I mean this sincerely, and I felt this way when the guy came out. It was one of the reasons why we didn't. Not only did we not have him as a top 5 player or a top 10 player, I think he was our 38th ranked overall player. They've missed on DJ Uiagalelei. And that's the first time in really 3 cycles that Clemson has not hit on a quarterback. And all of a sudden, what I tell you, when that happens, you become mortal pretty quickly. And now they're having to work around all that. Now, that happened to coincide with the departure of Travis Etienne and Amari Rodgers. And then you couple that with a very below average to average at best offensive line group. It's kind of obvious to see what's happening in Clemson. But that doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden going to regress and go back to being a 7-5 team for the next 20 years. But I think you got to acknowledge, some of the events that kind of came together at once, and on top of that, the most important position in football they may have missed on.
We've got a couple of minutes here. Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds Show. Luke's Auburn's obviously nasty in the line of scrimmage too, and went toe-to-toe with A&M for a while. Just super physical, like they've been pretty much my whole life. But what do you see, 11 a.m. game at Auburn this weekend? Mississippi State coming off a heartbreaking loss. They travel to Auburn.
Yeah, I'll tell you, both of those teams are reeling. Let's see who answers the toll, because you got to respond, you got to get back. And, the 11 a.m. I think helps Mississippi State, to be honest with you.
Agree.
It's not a place you want to play it. It's not a place you want to play at night. And it'll be interesting. Can Auburn get back to running the football? Because if they can get back to running the football, and Mississippi State continues to not be able to run the football, but can throw it and throw it really, really well, it's kind of like what we talked about. Limit Mississippi State's possessions by getting back to running the football if you're Auburn. I think that's kind of the recipe here. You're going to have to defend the pass. You're going to have to defend explosive plays. Well, let's try and limit how much we have to defend it.
All right. One more minute. Somebody asked this. We've talked about it briefly, but, do you think Dabo, that there's a job out there he would consider? You're close to that Clemson program. Or do you think he loves it, he's paid well, and he knows path of least resistance?
I think he loves it, he's paid well, and he knows it's a path of least resistance. Listen, think about it from his perspective. This university, we've talked about this, has made such an investment for football to thrive, have provided every little thing that program needs to have a chance. They've done all of it. So he knows what he's working with, all right? He's got conference dominance. He's in a low cost of living. So whatever it is, his $9 million a year, or whatever it is a year that he's making, goes a lot further in Clemson, South Carolina than it might go in other places. And he's living on a lake. He has no job pressure. I can totally see why he wouldn't even consider other job openings.
We'll leave it there. Tom Luginbill on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. Lugs, who do you have this weekend?
I got Notre Dame and Virginia, ABC primetime on Saturday night.
Keaton Thompson, who's actually had some good games over there at UVA this year.
He's been kind of a utility weapon.
He has. And from everything I know of, a really good young man. Lugs, thank you, buddy.
Good
Appreciate
kid.
it.
Yep. You bet.
Tom Luginbill, national college football analyst with ESPN on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. If you're looking to try a new beer with some pop, Bell's Two-Hearted Ale pairs great with the steak or a big bowl of pasta. Straight ahead, somebody on here says Mullen cannot motivate players. That's not what we've been told.